Hello and welcome. My name is James Packman and I'm the rector, the senior minister here at Holy Trinity Church in Nailsea, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Sunday Catch-Up. Sunday Catch-Up is where we take the Bible reading and the talk from last Sunday but make it available on the internet to those who might be blessed and encouraged by it, and I hope that you are. If you would like to be in contact with us, please do get in contact. The details are on our church website, www.htnailsea.org.uk. Please let us know if you've got any questions or if there's any way in which we can help you at this time. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad you can. May God bless you today.
Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up onto a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars, because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought that he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened.
Do you like travelling? If you do, I wonder if you just want to get to the destination or if the journey is part of the enjoyment. We first took our three young children on an aeroplane in 1998. It was the first time they'd ever been on a plane. And we were flying to Jersey, and there was much excitement. When we got on the plane, we were told that it was actually also going to stop at Plymouth, which we hadn't been expecting. And that would have been fine, apart from the fact that it was foggy in Plymouth. And as we approached the runway, the visibility was really poor. And the pilot got really close, but then decided to quickly abort the landing. So it went, whoa, whoa. And as we zoomed upward again, people around us were not happy, but my children were absolutely thrilled. They thought it was like being on a giant roller coaster. They were saying, "Mum, I hope we do that again." We landed on the third attempt, and frankly, it was a bit too exciting for Paul and I. Now we're continuing our series on First Sundays from Mark's Gospel, and today we're looking at the disciples' journey, which did not turn out as they had expected. And we're going to reflect on God comes to us in 4 different ways shown by these verses. Now, to put our passage into context, the disciples had just witnessed the feeding of the 5,000 from 5 loaves and 2 fishes. The miracle where God blesses this small amount of food, and somewhere between the disciples' hands and the people receiving it, he feeds this huge number of people, an amazing movement of God. But then Jesus immediately sends the disciples away. And they're told to get in a boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida. And Jesus stays and he dismisses the crowd and withdraws to pray. Now, if you look earlier in Mark, in chapter 1, you'd see he also did this in his early ministry. He withdrew to pray after he healed many people. If Jesus needed time with his Father, how much more do we? Number 1, God comes to us when we give him space. A story is told of Susanna Wesley. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but she had 10 children, including John and Charles Wesley, great Christian leaders in the 18th century. And she brought up her 10 children largely alone because her husband worked away a lot, and she homeschooled them all. But in the rural village of Epworth in England, it said if you peered through her window in the early 18th century, you may have seen a woman sitting in a chair with her kitchen apron pulled over her head, whilst her children read and studied and played around her. And it said she did this for 2 hours a day. And the children knew not to disturb her in that time. And the demands of her full life, she made space for God to work through her. She led huge Bible studies which were attended by many people. And her family, we know the stories maybe of her son John and Charles, and they were used greatly in God's mission at that time. So I wonder why we sometimes find it hard. Well, at least I do. Do you sometimes find it hard to make time to pray? It is easy to get hung up on thinking that prayer is one more activity that we really ought to do. It becomes a pressure. We can feel guilty about it if we don't feel that we do it enough. But maybe it's more about withdrawing and taking space to be with God, space to listen, space to be, space to reflect on who God is. A friend once said to me when I was struggling with this, he said, God just wants you to turn up. God comes to us when we give him space. So number 2, God comes to us. His gaze is always upon us. Verse 47, it's evening time and the disciples are in the middle of the lake. It's windy, it's hard going. It says they're straining at the oars. And though Jesus was likely too far away to physically see the boat through the stormy darkness, he knew their precise location. God's ability to see and to know everything is unlimited in its scope and universal in its sight. Sometimes when life feels turbulent, it may feel like our situation has slipped under Jesus' radar. The very nature of trauma itself can feel really isolating. I remember talking to a young, recently bereaved husband whose wife I had looked after in her terminal illness. And he articulated his new raw grief as, I'm surrounded by people, but I feel so alone. And whatever we're going through, Jesus sees us. He sees our storms. He sees our struggles. We are always in his sight. God's gaze is always upon us. So God comes to us when we give him space. His gaze is always upon us. Number 3, God comes to us. We are never beyond his reach. In our reading we've just had read, it talked about Jesus coming in the dawn, but in other translations it talks about Jesus coming in the 4th watch of the night, typically referred to between the hours of 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. because it was historically associated with when the Roman guard rotations changed and they were put on guard for 3 hours, 4 periods of 3 hours during the night. So the 4th watch is the last one between the hours of 3 and 6. And if we look at the passage that we've had read, given that when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and the disciples were said to be working hard at the oars, the 4th watch was significantly later. They had been really working hard. The disciples did not know Jesus had been watching them. They did not know he was heading towards them. They were focused on the storm and the rowing and the keeping safe. In the Old Testament, only God walked on water and had power over the sea. Job 9:8 says, "He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea." The image of God as intending to pass them by would have evoked an image of God's presence. The Lord, talking to Moses in Exodus 33, says, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." It indicated a powerful revelation of God. So when it says Jesus was about to pass by them in verse 48, it was intended to reassure them of his presence. In English we might say, "I'll pass by your house later." That doesn't really mean I'm going to walk past your house or drive past your house. It means I'm going to pop in or talk to you or drop something off, but at least communicate with you. So Mark is using language to mean that Jesus would pass by them to reveal himself in some way as God to them. Jesus walking on the water was a sign of his divinity, a miracle over nature, coming so close to them. But the boat is full of exhausted men who did not recognize him. They thought he was a ghost. They didn't get it. They cried out. They were terrified. How many times had those disciples been on that lake in a storm before, and this had never happened? Quite honestly, when we're in the middle of our storms, it's sometimes really hard to see where God is in it. But let's remember that God comes to us in the mess of life. We are never beyond his reach. God comes to us when we give him space. We are never beyond his gaze. We are never beyond his reach. Number 4. God comes to us. We are never beyond his care. Seeing their terror, Jesus does not shout, saying, "Don't you get who I am?" He doesn't say, "Come on, guys, how many miracles do you need to see?" He immediately says, Take courage. It's I. Don't be afraid. And then he climbs in the boat beside them. The wind dies down. The disciples were amazed. They'd not understood the significance of the feeding of the 5,000. It said their hearts were hardened. Now, when Jesus refers to stubborn hearts in Mark 3, he's referring to hostile outsiders. But here, the disciples themselves are struggling to understand who Jesus is. They had witnessed his miracles, but their faith was shaky. And Jesus doesn't lecture them. What do you need to see before you believe? He doesn't say that. He gets in the boat and he sits beside them. A God who comes to us, a God who sits with us. We are never beyond his care. These situations can happen to any of us. Circumstances of life may cause us to discover that our grasp of something we thought we knew well is not as secure as maybe we thought. Crises sometimes cause us to re-examine what we believe and where our true priorities lie. And sometimes our situations can push us into fear and anxiety. Maybe there are times when our hearts are indeed hardened. We just don't get it. I have great sympathy for those fearful disciples. They'd been involved and witnessed a massive miracle, an amazing spiritual high. Yet Jesus then made them get in a boat, told them to go to Bethsaida, left them, and within a short time, their day looked so very different. It is truly a day of great highs and great lows. And in fact, they didn't even end up in Bethsaida at all, but Gennesaret, where they were blown to the other side of the lake. Most of us will have had days which started off in one way, and ended up in a very different way. So let's look at what Jesus says. He says, take courage. Why? Because God is God. The God who walks on water cares enough to sit beside us. Courage does not come from what we can do, but believing in what he can do. It is I. It's like saying the great, we hear in the Gospels, the great I am, declaring himself to be God. Don't be afraid. Why? Because we're never beyond his gaze, beyond his reach, beyond his care. Jesus climbs in the boat and the wind stops. And sometimes that might happen to us, but sadly, sometimes our storms don't always end in that way at the end of the day. So what does this passage teach us about holding on to the paradox of living through our own storms and challenges and turbulent periods of our lives on the one hand, and holding on to our faith in God, our powerful God, a God who walks on the water in the other? And when we're faced with these situations, I think it may help us to consider three things: complaint, lament, and what else do we know? You see, when we feel overwhelmed by our own or others' suffering, or live with uncertainty, whether this came on slowly or hijacked us, on a day which started as a normal day but ended differently. A common response is complaint, alongside fear and anxiety, and I think that's understandable. And often the reality of our lives is that sometimes we're living with good things and with difficult things all entwined at the same time. And I think it's absolutely fine to be really honest about our wounds and our pains and our disappointments and our questions. And I don't think God ever requires us to deny our humanity. We see complaint and lament going hand in hand in many of our Psalms. And if you read the Psalms, often they start with, "Oh God, kind of where are you?" And then they end with a declaration of faith. And I used to think the psalmist was going through a process, and he started in the difficult period and then ended up declaring faith. But actually, I think reading about them and looking at them, that it's more that we hold these things together. We hold the crying out of our heart alongside, but I'm hanging on to believe you are God. In these difficult periods, our friends are particularly important to travel alongside us, to support us, to cheer us on. And that's where the church family has such an important part to play. So if you're in one of those situations, please do reach out if others don't know, so people can walk beside you. But a good question to ask is also, what else do we know? We know the following are true. God comes to us when we give him space. God comes to us. We are never beyond his gaze. God comes to us. We are never beyond his reach. God comes to us. We are never beyond his care. We may rightly lament over the storms, our challenges, our circumstances. But what else do we know is true? We can have hope in the God who can walk on water, who still comes to us. He is the great I am, the all-knowing, all-present, all-powerful God who really, really cares about us. When I was preparing this and thinking about unbelief, I think sometimes all of us can have periods or things that we are struggling to believe about God, because I don't think any of us have probably grasped the reality of who God is, how big he is, how wonderful he is, and we only ever get a glimpse of that. So I'm going to pray a prayer that includes a line that says, "Please forgive our unbelief." Because I want us, and I want personally to know more about God, to understand the things that I find difficult to believe, to see him move more in my life. And if you want to join with me in the prayer that I'm going to say, please feel free to stand up in a moment, and I will say this prayer over us. I'll read it to you first so you know what it is, and then if you want to join me in standing, I'll say it again a second time. The prayer is this: Dear Lord, please forgive our unbelief. Help us as we lament over what breaks our heart and your heart, but also to declare in faith what we know to be true, that you are our loving, all-powerful, ever-present God. If you'd like to stand and we can pray this together, if you don't, that's also fine. Dear Lord, please forgive our unbelief. Help us as we lament over what breaks our hearts and breaks yours, to also declare in faith what we know to be true, that you indeed are our loving, all-powerful, ever-present God. Amen.